deep inside, and I wanna talk about it. Can I trust you on my side? Cause I wanna talk about it. Can you keep a secret? Keep a secret. Can you keep a secret? No, keep a secret. Can you keep a secret? I wanna trust you. I wanna trust you. So can you keep my secret? You see this road gets tough, gets everything it takes and more. You're not alone in this war. Help is on the way in every other day. You can lean on me. Superhuman, you got my trust, man. Talk about it, yeah, let's talk about it, yeah. I feel lonely deep inside, and I wanna talk about it. Can I trust you on my side? Cause I wanna talk about it. Can you keep a secret? Keep a secret. Can you keep a secret? Keep a secret. Can you keep a secret? I wanna trust you. I wanna trust you. So can you keep my secret?
Hi everyone, and welcome to PsyCast Diaries. Can you keep a secret diaries? My name is Juanita Headley. I am a New York attorney and the founder and CEO of Changing Cases. You are listening to a set of discussions dealing with the issues of human trafficking, global challenges, child abuse prevention, and of course, knowing how to respond to the question, can you keep a secret? Over the following weeks and months, I'm going to take a look at some hard-hitting topics with a view to educate, empower, and inspire you to change the way that you think, act, and respond to better safeguard the children in your world. Stay tuned until the end of this show, where I'll be sharing with you about my new book, Can You Keep a Secret?, about my weekly Zooms and podcasts. Today, I'm excited to introduce to you fellow attorney Gregory Love. Thank you so much, Gregory Love, for being here.
I'm excited to be here, Juanita. It's been a long time since I've seen you.
Yes, it has. And I'm really thrilled, and I trust that the audience will be educated and inspired as well as empowered by today's topic. For those of you who are used to me doing these sessions, you would know that I'm using multiple devices. So please do kindly show me some grace as I'll read to you Greg's bio. Gregory Love is the managing partner at the law firm of Love and Norris. He is the co-founder of Ministry Safe and Abuse Prevention Systems. His clients include denominations, churches, universities, private schools, public and private charities, and youth sports groups. He is an expert in legal standards of care related to child sexual abuse. He has consulted with the organizations such as U.S. Olympic Committee, U.S. Center for Safe Sport, Awana International, Child Life USA, U.S. Youth Soccer, North American Mission Board, and several faith-based organizations and denominations. Love is visiting faculty at Dallas Theological Seminary, where he teaches the only graduate level course on preventing sexual abuse in ministry contexts. Love regularly provides instruction and continuing education training to lawyers and risk management professionals. Gregory, is there anything in addition you'd like to add to what I've just shared? Anything I may have missed out?
Probably the most important thing is that my wife is also my law partner, and she too is an expert in child sexual abuse, and her name is Kimberly Norris, and that's why the firm Love and Norris. Norris is my wife and law partner.
Thank you for saying that. Now to start, I'd love for you to just share with us about your life, your home. I know that you're from Texas. As you're aware, the people listening in are from all around the world, and of course, Texas is very different from a place like New York or Oregon. So can you share with us a little about your background and the culture in Texas for those who've never been or would love the opportunity to one day come to Texas so they get an idea about what it's like and what you love so much about your hometown?
I think the best thing about my hometown and the place where I live is that the people here are welcoming, they're friendly, and it's a good community here. Now in Texas, we talk funny, so there's where you can show me some grace. But nonetheless, it's an inviting place, it's a comfortable place, and I don't know that I would live anywhere else, just from the standpoint of the community and the people.
And I love that. We're definitely going to show you a lot of grace. It really is an honor to have you, and there's so much we're going to be delving into today. And I'm so thoroughly excited to have you on the show. As you said, it's been a while since we met in person, which was in Florida at the Christians Lawyers Conference many years ago. And I definitely was really inspired by all that you had to share. And so I'm going to keep saying how amazing you are and how it really is a privilege to have you here today. With regards to things, of course, we know the lockdown has changed drastically the way that things work around the world. Even just simply buying and selling in the UK, you now need to scan in and out to be able to eat or to drink, etc. When it comes to a place like Texas, can you share with us some of the major changes that have taken place over the last 2 decades, particularly when we think about child abuse and when we think about the internet and how that has made a lot of changes, many positives, but many negatives? How would you say Texas has changed from when you were growing up to how it is now in relation to child sexual abuse?
Well, I'd say that most of the changes have frankly come in the last 20 years. So I'm in my mid-50s, so I don't know, I can't really speak to there being much change between the mid-1960s and 1980. But some of the change in Texas is similar to what we've seen across the country. So let me start small. There was a time why sexual abuse was a significant problem. It's always been a significant problem, but it really never was discussed. So in fact, in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, when there was a matter that came to light involving an adult and a child in a sexually inappropriate situation, oftentimes it was the child that was shamed. It was the child that was blamed. And somehow it was very, the victim was re-victimized by how our culture treated that situation. Now, beginning in the probably late 80s and early 90s, because of a lot of the religious things that were coming to light at that point, you started to see shifts, especially when the male victims started to speak up. That was very, very odd. Male victims didn't speak up. Okay, so most of the circumstances that we started to see in the 70s and the early 80s was primarily female victims. So when the Catholic Church started entering into its adventure into child sexual abuse litigation, we saw primarily boys coming forward. And it's a lot of the US culture didn't have a category for that. Okay, but in Texas in particular, because you see, it's a matter of how the law or how law enforcement professionals respond to things like that once they come to light, or how different lawmakers will start to make laws to try to discourage things or make reporting a requirement. So Texas, believe it or not, was very progressive and was one of the leaders in the United States, which made them one of the leaders in the world in making the requirement that every adult is mandated to report suspicions of child sexual abuse or neglect. There was also legislation passed requiring training that no other state, even to this day, has passed. Okay, so in many ways, Texas leads the world in creating the requirements that people talk about this thing that's not talked about, but also requiring training, which in my opinion, those two things in like hand in glove are some of the biggest things that are going to change this epidemic of child sexual abuse. Helping people understand what it looks like and requiring them to say something once they do.
And actually, I appreciate you sharing that, because for myself, I wasn't actually even informed of the fact that Texas is the leader in relation to this topic in the United States. And of course, when we think about leadership, I know that in the US, you are deemed as a leader when it comes to the topic of anti-child sexual abuse. Can you tell us how this came about? But before you share that, why did you decide to pursue a career in law? And then why this avenue of anti-child sexual abuse?
Well, the reason why I decided to choose a career in law was I grew up in a single parent home, and there were lots of needs for criminal lawyers given some of the behavior of my older brother. And there's some people in my world that had lawyers and they could just navigate life easier than my single mom could. So I figured, you know what, our family needs a lawyer. So Now, when you're 12 years old, that doesn't have a lot of refinement to the plan, but that's what had me pursuing law. I really didn't understand that that was going to be shaped significantly by who I married and the first couple of cases that I began to work on. So ultimately, that practice of law got shaped into a practice of law with respect to child sexual abuse risk.
And the second part of the question was the child sexual abuse expertise. How did that come about?
Got you. Sometimes in the law, you don't choose your niche, kind of it chooses you. And so it's almost like I didn't see it coming this way, but my wife and law partner was working on a case involving a group home that was really a very uncomfortable place for children. And there was somebody who finally was a seminary student that went to work there. And he started working with these kids, and the kids started to trust him. And they started to give him bits and pieces of information about what they have been enduring there, which was a lot of physical and sexual abuse, and even a lot of peer-to-peer. In other words, child with child inappropriate sexual behavior. So once he started getting this information, him knowing that everyone in Texas is a mandated reporter to the authorities, he went to his supervisor to try to initiate those reports to the authorities and get the children care. Of course, he was treated poorly by the leadership, ultimately fired, and he was blamed for being the sexual abuser, kind of as a way to keep him quiet. So he's now at that point unemployable if he wants to work with children. So he went to find a Christian employment lawyer. He found my wife. Now, my wife is smart enough to know nobody makes a lot of money representing a part-time seminary student who was just fired for allegedly molesting children. But she believed his story, and it made her mad. And that began this adventure into being a voice for that young man. But see, we had to go talk to the sexual abuse victims. So in other words, if he's going to be a whistleblower, we had to prove the underlying wrongdoing for which he was allegedly blowing the whistle. So we wound up talking to about 50 sexual abuse victims, okay, who were also asking the question, will you be my voice too? And she said, absolutely, let's let them hear you. Now, this was back when there really was no child sexual abuse litigation. Okay, so really what she had begun in the early 90s was almost like the front end of what has now become a huge area of the law. So the first wave of resolution of that case was somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 million. And it got a lot of people calling saying, hey, we didn't know that was worth money. Will you help us sue this organization? Or, hey, I want to sue this entity over here. Now, of course, Kimberly and I decided our gifting, education, and experience, we'd prefer to use that to help organizations do it right, not just make all the money that could be made by tearing them down. Now, part of the question you asked me that I'm going to address is, why is the U.S. the leader in the world as to these changes? Okay, and part of that is that same legal system that if you can sue somebody and you can threaten their pocketbook, if you can sue them to make them change, that's a very powerful tool to bring this to light and to encourage people to see it clearly, get the information when there is cover up, be able to display to the public, this is how offensive and awful some of this behavior has been to get us to this place. That's what can bring about change. So there's plenty of lawyers that are doing that side to continue to get the environment waking up to this. We just decided we're going to pursue the role of prevention. Okay, so in terms of being a trial lawyer, I don't get invited to a circumstance until something has gone epically wrong. Okay, so I'm going to bring with me, and I know as a lawyer, Juanita, you've heard this phrase before, but it's called standard of care. Okay, so when I stand over a train wreck, if you will, I'm bringing that lens with me of this is what you should have been doing to protect the children in your care. But see, when I stand over that train wreck and evaluate the facts, oftentimes what I find is this is in fact what you're doing. And if you're doing less than what you should be doing, the standard of care, that's what gives rise to liability in the American system. Okay, so that's what costs people money. That's what has your insurance carrier anxious about what you were doing and what you should have been doing. That brings about change. But see, it's the same thing that makes us good as prevention experts. I know what the standard of care is. I know what you should be doing to protect children in your care. But if I get the opportunity, Juanita, to go to organizations before something's gone wrong I get to have a discussion with you about, hey, if there would be something to go wrong, it would go epically bad for you. Let's take the opportunity to get you where you need to be. And so even back in the early 90s, mid 90s, we started that pursuit of trying to help organizations understand what they need to know so they could keep the children in their care protected.
And as you were sharing, the scripture that this came to mind is that all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. And I was thinking about the story of the whistleblower and how at first set, the appearance of it is this guy is doomed. He's lost his job. He's ruined. But the Lord is a God who turns all things around. And it's so inspiring to hear that just hearing of his story and then meeting the survivors and victims, you and your wife were able to be a voice. And what's so important is it's not about being reactive, it's about being proactive. And your ministry is doing amazing and truly phenomenal work. So I want to commend both you and your wife for all that you're doing. What would you say in your line of work is your greatest challenge? Because I'm sure there are challenges that come with the nature of the work that you do. What are some of the challenges that you experience?
Probably the biggest challenge that I experience, Juanita, is people who just won't listen. Organizations who just won't take this seriously, especially even today in 2021. I mean, this was a significant problem even back in the 90s, even back in the 80s. And when I could talk to people about, this is what this risk looks like, this is what you need to be doing, please listen to me, your children are at risk, and just to have that wasted breath because people wouldn't listen. People think it's, no, that's somebody else's problem. That happens in that socioeconomic group. And it's like, no. Trust me, I'm right. Yet I meet those people 5, 6 years later, and some horrible things had been happening to their children, and only then will they listen when it all erupts. So in 2021, I'm still hearing people tell me, oh my gosh, Greg, I saw one of your trainings, and this is just revolutionary to me to wake up to this. Like, wake up to this. The training hasn't changed in 25 years. Now, it's technologically gotten better, but it's the same material because the grooming process of the preferential offender hasn't changed. And I think that will continue to discourage me into the future as I'm going to meet somebody in 2025, Juanita, that for the first time is going to think, oh my gosh, this is so valuable information. Why didn't the whole world know this? So the frustration, I'm getting more and more people that now are receiving this and we're making change. But it's not just even in the US, it's worldwide, that there's just this amazing ignorance that's going to continue to get children in harm's way.
And I concur. And as the Bible says, people perish for lack of knowledge. Knowledge is power, and it can be disheartening, especially if someone comes back to you and says, if only I had known, I could have protected my student, I could have protected my son or daughter. And of course, we know that in life, it's a journey of ups and downs, highs and lows. What would you say is your greatest motivation? We've just spoken about the challenges of people not listening, and it's sometimes falling on deaf ears until years later. But what is your greatest motivation, despite the difficulties that you face of people not adhering to advice that you're giving?
We don't litigate as much as we used to, simply because it takes a whole lot more effort and energy to do the prevention side. But we still will litigate in context where a child has been victimized in the course of their parents participating in a cult. And so when I get to represent children in those circumstances who in that cult have been taught these particular people are authority, you do not bust against this organization, and to have that person as my client and to walk them through and see me be a tool of judgment for them, and also have someone say, thank you, you believed me. You know, you are my advocate. You are a voice to me. That is seriously empowering and encouraging to go back into a world of prevention where people, it's still the same conversation that we should have been having 15 years ago. So when I get to be the advocate for somebody is really a powerful motivator, especially for someone who wouldn't have otherwise had a voice.
And as you're just saying that there, I'm thinking about the Holy Spirit who advocates on our behalf. And of course, I think it's amazing that we have people like you and your wife who are advocating for victims and survivors in the US. And as you rightly said, this needs to go further afield. The information, it is so useful, not just for people in the US, but around the world, because sexual abuse, it may be done differently in a different culture. But as you said, grooming is very much consistent and the same. with all the work you've been doing, is there any particular story that you've heard or any particular client that you've encountered where that truly impacted and affected you, maybe gave you sleepless nights? Has there ever been such an occasion?
I remember in representing a young man who was victimized, and I was preparing him for his deposition, and he was just extraordinarily emotionally upset. And I was like, why is this such, I mean, is this the deposition? Is it recounting all of these things? And he goes, no, I'm just really, really upset and anxious about the fact that my wife is about to have our first child. It's like, normally that's a time for joy. I mean, why is that something that is such an anxiety producing event for you? He goes, all the things that I read say I'm going to molest my own child. And I can't do that. I'd rather take my life than put my child through this. And it's heartbreaking to hear some of the ways this topic is talked about that essentially re-victimizes a victim and has that person feeling as if they're wearing extra shame and embarrassment and guilt that's not even theirs to carry. And so it goes back to that idea, just good information communicated to people that desperately need it, not just to prevent, but also to do the healing that's so important for some of these people that have experienced this.
Thank you for sharing that. And actually, it's very true. Often we are re-victimized. And I say that as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse myself, the blame and responsibility is often put on us. And even when we think about rape and we hear, what was the woman wearing? Or why did she go out at night? A lot of the times the blame is placed on them. Why would you say that child sexual abuse is still a problem today? What is causing it to be prevalent? And even more so when we think about technology, and despite the lockdown, we know that child sexual abuse does indeed continue, and even virtually.
Yeah, I get an average of 5 to 6 phone calls a day from different organizations or circumstances. And I'm here to tell you, even with the lockdown and the pandemic, Juanita, that number of calls has not let up. So in terms of why it's still a problem, I mean, there's multiple parts to answering that question. I mean, there's people with deviant sexual desires. I mean, there are people that have a deviant sexual desire for sexual interaction with the child, you know, that generally has a age and sex of preference in terms of a refinement of that predation. But our culture is continuing to go off the rails. And as long as we go off the rails and it feeds this hypersexuality of our culture and that it gets more and more deviant, I mean, you got demand, then you're going to have people supplying it. So whether it's child pornography, whether it's trafficking, whether it's, you know, sex tourism, but in terms of why it continues to be a problem just in normal neighborhoods, in churches, in schools, in camps, and nonprofits, is we don't understand this problem. Okay, in other words, you can't prevent a problem that you don't understand. And I think one of the better ways to illustrate that is, I mean, most everybody that's an adult will remember that on 9/11, there was a significant terrorist attack in the United States. Okay, well, sexual abuse and terrorism in my world, they have a lot of similarities. And so, like, in terms of terrorism, nobody expected that that's what terrorism was supposed to look like. We had our idea of what terrorism was, and we were actively fighting it as we understood it. We just had it wrong. And it was a very rude wake-up call that had us understand that, no, this is what it looks like. And it's this concept, and you mentioned earlier that with information comes power. The opposite is also true. When you're holding on to poor information or a lack of information, see, here's how that works in my world, Juanita. What we believe shapes what we do. Okay? What we believe shapes what we see and what we say. So in child sexual abuse risk, taking just the US, for example, for starters, we believe wrong things or not enough of the right things. And here's how that works. When you believe wrong things, you do wrong things. And that gets you into predictable ditches. That's what generates the calls to my office. So what I see as the continuation of the problem is we have this culture that continues to hypersexualize and make this deviant sexual desire, you know, erupt and then have access points. But for those of us who are parents, or those of us who are in programs to protect and provide care to children, we're believing wrong things, and that has to change. So what our mission here is, if I can teach you the right things, then I can have you do the right things, then I avoid those predictable ditches.
Thank you for sharing that. And you've made reference a few times that we're believing in the wrong things. Can you enlighten us on what exactly we are misbelieving and what it is that we do need to believe? What are the right things that we need to believe to better understand this topic so we can protect and safeguard the children around us?
Yeah, and some of the answer I'm going to give you is going to be unique to the US, but some of these are going to be just worldwide misconceptions that we hold on to. All right. First of all, there's that misconception that, what are you talking about? Somebody wants to have sex with a 5-year-old? No, come on. You got to be kidding. That's not true. That can't be right. Or if it is right, it's only this big of a problem. I mean, come on, Greg, don't make it sensational. It's like, whoa, no. Statistically, in the US, we probably gather more information than anybody in the world. But statistically, it's 1 out of 4 girls will be victimized before she's 18. And that number is growing, okay? 1 out of 4 or 5 or 6 boys will be victimized before he's 18, depending on which study that you read, okay? So some of the reasons why that misinformation, the things that we need to identify is, first of all, people don't think it's a problem. Or if they do think it's a problem, they think it's a problem for that racial group or that denomination or in that socioeconomic or in that geographical area. You'll have 100 different reasons why it's someone else's problem but not your own, and I'm here to tell you you're wrong. Okay, sexual abuse is truly an equal opportunity employer, all right? So it's an enormous problem. It's an our problem. However you gather in community, whatever program you're engaged in, it is your problem. And I'm going to digress for a second and back up. It's like, if you put on your lenses of the sexual abuser, just like putting on the lenses of your terrorist, what a terrorist wants to do is find the weak seam, okay? Find that access point. Where is that weak stretch of the border? Where is that weak place where there's no monitoring? Where is that soft target or building? A sexual abuser is doing the same thing. It's like, where is the access point? Where are the barriers the lowest? And it's generally the lowest where the people have the least information, okay? So in terms of the misinformation or the things that are lacking, we need to understand it is a problem and get some information about the problem. 2, we need to understand it's my problem, regardless of how I describe myself or my program or my community. Number 3, we need to get a better sense of how big is the problem. So just in the US, and keep in mind, the US has some of the best law enforcement systems, the best reporting infrastructures and information gathering apparatus. In the US, they would tell us there are 60 million sexual abuse survivors. Okay, now given a population of 300 million people, that's 1 out of 5 Americans was sexually victimized before he or she was 18 years old. Take that same demographic worldwide, and understanding it might be lower in the US than in other places in the world, 1 billion people having been sexually abused before they were 18. Okay, it's like, that's mind-numbing when you start to take those statistics outside of the borders of the US, all right? But now let's turn the diamond a little bit in terms of the size of the problem, that we need to understand that the average male molester in the US, for example, if that male molester prefers boys, that male molester will have 150 victims prior to criminal prosecution. Okay, average male molester that prefers girls will have 52 victims prior to criminal prosecution. By way of context, the average male molester starts victimizing at 13 or 14 years old, and the average age of criminal prosecution in the US is 35. Okay, so there's some staggering numbers in a fairly narrow window of time. So one of the most notorious sexual abusers still in the media today is this man named Larry Nassar that was associated with USA Gymnastics. I know you've heard of him, Juanita, okay? See, he was victimizing children for I don't know how many years. If you look at the statistics, he began at 13 or 14 years old, and he was in his mid-50s when he was finally, it's like the numbers could be staggering beyond just the 250 gymnasts that we're familiar with. So the problem is enormous, and the reason why having an understanding of the size of the problem, why that's important, You see, here's the way we do it. We're just naturally wired, not just in the US. You see, my energy, effort, and urgency about protecting my child from anything is driven by how dangerous I think the circumstance is. So it's like I take my child to the park and somebody lets their dog off the leash. Is that important to me on the park that someone let their dog off the leash? Answer is yes. But how anxious am I going to get about it? Well, it depends on how big that dog is and if it looks dangerous. If it's a little teacup poodle, I'll snap its little neck, no problem. But if it's a very dangerous looking dog, the energy, effort, and urgency I give it is going to change. So what we need to understand about child sexual abuse is the size of this problem so that I truly, as a parent or caregiver, can give it the appropriate energy, effort, and urgency that this problem deserves. Okay, so the information that I lack in this bank of information, I don't understand it's a problem, or I don't understand how big the problem is to truly drive my energy, effort, and urgency. Okay, but then the next misconception we see, at least, and especially in the US, is this idea that, well, everybody who wears a name tag in this program has done a background check. Okay, like that in the US is the silver bullet. That's what we think solves the problem. But unfortunately, what we know about the child sexual abuse and law enforcement is that less than 10% of sexual abusers will ever encounter the criminal justice system. Okay, it's like, okay, well, you did it, but more than 90% of the people that wish to hurt our children have nothing for you to find, comma, and they know it. And so the last misconception that's, and probably the most dangerous one, Juanita, is this idea that people think they can spot a sexual abuser. And that's just wrong. So, I mean, you're familiar with that concept, stranger danger. Have you heard that? See, I don't know in the UK if they have those same type of little programs on Saturday morning cartoons that we used to watch.
And actually, I was going to ask you about stranger danger, if you could enlighten us. But even what you shared there about equal opportunity employer, I remember that term very well from many years ago in Florida. And that is really the reality. It doesn't discriminate, regardless of your ethnicity or salary. And as you've rightly said, a background check, it doesn't actually show everything, because there are many perpetrators who are never arrested, convicted, let alone charged, and they can go on to abuse and abuse and abuse. Can you enlighten us a little bit about this whole stranger danger? Because, of course, as we both know, it is usually the people that you know who sexually abuse, exploit, or even traffic you.
Yeah, and it's like, and stranger danger is just the little rhymey jingle phrase that we oftentimes hear in the US. I mean, when I've trained internationally, that there's the same concept, it just doesn't have that little label on it. But in the US, this concept of stranger danger, this idea that if we can just teach our children to, when a stranger approaches them, whether it's to give them a ride home, offer them candy, help me find my puppy, anything like that, we're trying to teach the children that if you'll yell and point and say stranger danger, it'll alert these other adults out here that will come help you. And this person who is the bad actor, the guy with the trench coats and the candy, will then run away. Okay, now the difficulty with that is stranger danger is not just like this new phrase we use for protecting children. Stranger danger is just the label, Juanita, on how we already naturally are wired. Okay, much like I mentioned a moment ago about protecting my own child on a playground. Okay, I'm going to sit on the bench and I look like I'm relaxing, but even subconsciously, I'm always watching my child's environment for those things that might hurt her. Okay, this idea of the visual cue that will get me to act. But we all have this reinforcement in our culture that a sexual abuser is somebody that usually is wearing a trench coat, they're driving an ice cream truck or a white van. And if I keep on the lookout, like at Halloween, when we go trick-or-treating, I mean, everybody's a perp on Halloween, okay? I'll watch my kid very closely. But when I take my child into a community of people that look like me, that talk like me, that believe the same things as me, I close my eyes and I rest. So stranger danger has valuable, but let me show you where stranger danger has valuable and why it's a problem, not an asset, okay? So the first thing I'd want your viewers to understand, Juanita, is there are 4 types of sexual abusers. okay? The only two I want to talk about are two types to contrast them. One is your abduction offender. Now, your abduction offender may have no relationship to the child or the child's family, just sees the child, grabs the child, and goes. We'll usually get an alert to our iPhones, or we'll see something on the news a few days later when they find the body. It's usually awful. Okay, the abduction offender. Now, on the waterfront of child sexual abuse risk, the abduction offender represents 4% of the problem. Okay, 4%. But see, Juanita, that is the offender we are most familiar with. That is the offender we're preparing for, 4%. Contrast that with the preferential offender, okay? Preferential offender could be male or female, have an age-appropriate adult willing to have sex with him or her, but prefers a child as a sexual partner. And not just any child, it's usually a child within an age and sex of preference. See, there's a narrowness to the deviance. Okay, so the preferential offender on that waterfront of child sexual abuse risk represents 94% of the problem. See, Juanita, the preferential offender is the problem. Now, let me take you to a fact pattern that we worked on in one of our cases, and I'm going to show you how this unfolds in terms of what we believe that's wrong, winds up what we do being wrong, and how it creates a problematic situation. There was a church that did small children's ministry in a horseshoe-shaped building, okay? Had a fence across that top of the horseshoe. They created this little courtyard area. And this was the playground for the little kids. And in the play structure in the middle of that playground, these little panels, it created this little boxy area, all right? So with two staff members sitting on benches 20 feet away, this one Sunday morning, 6-year-old boy wooed the 4-year-old girl into that boxy area and victimized the little girl. Now, little girl went home with her parents. She's very upset and withdrawn. Parents couldn't figure out what happened, and she lacked the vocabulary to even describe what she had endured. But she got enough communication out, and the parents believed her. And don't think that always happens. Parents called leadership of the church. Church called Kimberly and I, and we came out that next Sunday morning, got there early. So the women were there, but the children weren't on the playground yet. So we asked these ladies, can we visit for a moment? And they were pleasant. They said, of course. So we need to talk to you about the sexual abuse situation that happened on your playground last week. Both of them backed up and said, no, that's not possible. It's like, no, actually it is possible, but tell me why you think that. And both of them said, because we have a fence. Now see, Juanita, there it is. See, for both these women who love Jesus and love these children, where did they think risk comes from? Outside the fence. What they didn't know is that 94% of the risk happens on this side of the fence. So actually in that situation, watch how this works. Is stranger danger valuable? Answer, yes, but watch this. Will stranger danger help you protect children from the abduction offender? Answer, perhaps. Will stranger danger help you protect children from the preferential offender? Answer, absolutely not. Because see, stranger danger reinforces that there's some visual profile you're supposed to see. See, like on my playground, I had two women that in their bank of information, they knew about the abduction offender and that was it. And so they were dutifully watching that fence. And as long as nobody threatened that fence, it was a safe day in children's ministry. They had no idea in that bank of information there was such a thing as a preferential offender or peer-to-peer sexual abuse, which is what that was on the playground. So when I go to my churches, for example, and I say, hey, what do you do here to protect children from sexual abuse? They'll tell me about their background checks, and they'll tell me about their child check-in system. You know what I mean by a child check-in system, okay? So watch how this works. Will your child check-in system help you protect children from the abduction offender? Answer, perhaps. Will your child check-in system help you protect children from the preferential offender? Answer, absolutely not. See, it was never designed to protect the child from the preferential offender. See, watch how this works. The type of protective fence you build is driven by what you want to keep out. When I go to most of the programs in the U.S., and I know this is true outside the U.S., when I ask, what do you do to protect children from sexual abuse? People are going to tell me all about their fence related to the abduction offender. You're doing a great job protecting these children from 4% of the risk. But when I ask you, what are you doing to protect children from the preferential offender? When people look at me like the what? You don't have a protective barrier because you had no idea. It's like the terrorism. We had our fence up to stop terrorism that looked like this. We had no idea it would come in the form of this. So the starting place in this, Juanita, is it's like the hand in gloves. Like, I want to get the misinformation out, but I want to put the good information in. Because if I can give you good information, then you do good things and the children are protected. And that's why the type of fence we build is driven by what we want to keep out. What do I want to keep out? The preferential offender. But like I just mentioned on stranger danger, preferential offender looks like you and me. Okay, there's no visual profile for a preferential offender. We can't recognize the risk visually, Juanita. We must understand this risk behaviorally. And so when I talk about the type of fence you build is driven by what you want to keep out, we must understand the behaviors of the preferential offender, the grooming process. Okay, and in my opinion, from 30 years of doing this work, the key to solving this problem is understanding the grooming process of the preferential offender.
And thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, these numbers are staggering. The protection is for the 4%, and we're all forgetting about the 96. And I'm so glad you've highlighted the term grooming, because I feel that a lot of people who talk to their children when they're small about stranger danger or staying safe from abuse, they don't actually discuss the topic of grooming, or maybe they don't even know what grooming is. And for me, I feel and believe that grooming is a topic that really needs to be at the forefront of the conversation that parents are having with their children. Because the reality is a lot of children know about the whole good secrets, bad secrets, and nobody should touch your private parts. But grooming, even in my experience of surviving sexual abuse, grooming is one of the reasons why the abuse continued. But of course, there are a lot of people who don't know what grooming is. So can you expand on grooming, what it is, for the listening viewers, so that they're able to better talk to their children when it comes to the topic of sexual abuse?
Right. And I don't say that grooming is one of those things that I want to talk to the children about until they reach a certain age where they can start to connect certain problematic behaviors as to why this is information you need to share with me as your parent or your caregiver. But just getting back up to 30,000 feet, we're done talking about the abduction offender. Now, it's only the preferential offender, which is that's our problem. Okay. And the preferential offender, remember, has a deviant sexual desire. So they prefer a child within an age and sex of preference. So there's a narrowness. You'll see this person will have 45 victims that are all girls that are ages 13 and 14. This person will have 77 victims that are all 4 and 5 and 6-year-old children. Okay. So there's a narrowness, and usually you'll see a consistency by the type of person that's going to be victimized by the preferential offender, because they have an age and sex of preference that they gravitate toward. All right. And to start with, the grooming process, we break it down into 4 steps: gaining access, selecting the child, introducing nudity and sexual touch, and keeping the victim quiet. Okay. So there's just the down and dirty 1, 2, 3, 4. But now I went back up to 30,000 feet. You've got your preferential offender with a deviant sexual desire. Where that person gains access, that first step in the grooming process, is going to be driven by their age and sex of preference. Okay, say, for example, someone has a deviant sexual desire for 13-year-old girls. If they came to my church, would they be interested in working with toddlers? It's like, no. They're going to access, they want a name tag that can give them access to where there are children within the age and sex of preference. Okay, so that's important. That's information that you can't necessarily see yet, because when I stand over train wrecks, here's what I see, Juanita. I can always evaluate this and be able to tell the church, like, your problem that you're seeing is here, but your problem really began way, way back here. You just didn't see it for what it was. Okay, so when we do the forensic work after the train has wrecked, I get to ask and answer the questions like, hey, what did you see and when did you see it? And here's what I found, Juanita. I have plenty of people, once things have gone bad, that will tell me, you know what, now that you mention it, Greg, I did see that. I just didn't understand what it was at the time I saw it. So if I can teach people the grooming process, even the parts of it that you don't necessarily see, when you finally get to something you do see, you have a context for understanding it, rather than, you know, that guy was always in the closet with that little girl and I just never understood why. It's like, well, let me give you a possible context for understanding why that little girl was in the closet, so you never have to see it more than once before you'll say something. Deep cleansing breath, okay? So the grooming process, deviant sexual desire is going to drive where that person seeks access. If it's someone with a deviant sexual desire for, say, 5-year-old girls, where in the U.S. culture will you find 5-year-old girls? Daycare centers, pre-Ks, children's ministries, Mom's Day Out programs, okay? That person's going to want to seek access, whether they get paid or a volunteer, to be an authority in a program that cares for that age and sex of child, okay? So that person will work to get a name tag, because you don't just walk off the street and say, hey, where are the 5-year-olds, okay? You're going to come to that entity, and that person's going to be helpful, trustworthy, and kind, and they're going to find out what it takes to get a name tag to serve in that particular organization. Because once they have a name tag, that's what opens the doors to access. Okay, so and it's important to also note, kind of going hand in glove with that idea of no visual profile, here's one of the things that we have to overcome in the US and around the world, Juanita. When somebody presents to us as educated, attractive, and articulate, if someone is going to be educated, attractive, and helpful, our propensity is to lower the barrier, to close our eyes and welcome that person in. But what I'm telling everybody who listens to this, whether it's today or into the future, is we don't ever close our eyes. That doesn't mean we don't trust people. That just means that we need to recognize that inside of us, that nature and propensity, that when someone impresses me as being educated, attractive, and articulate or helpful, I lower my guard to the things that I own and the children in my care. I'm just here to tell you, don't lower your guard. You can welcome them in, but I want you to always have your eyes open for what? The grooming process. And I don't care if the grooming process is coming from someone who's educated, attractive, and articulate, who's got the world-class resume for childcare, because I'm fooled by the visual profile, and the abuser knows that. The abuser is going to try to convince me that he or she is helpful, trustworthy, and kind, because that's the currency in our culture to have me lower my guard. Okay, so for everybody who listens to this, the guard goes up for what? Goes up for anyone. And I have my eyes open looking for the grooming process of the preferential offender. And I know in your show, Juanita, we lack the time to go as deep into this information as I'd like to, which is why anybody that I hear from you that says, I'd like a online sexual abuse awareness training link, they will get that from me without charge immediately. Okay, because the awareness training is what provides the information about the grooming process and common grooming behaviors. Okay, so in terms of grooming, gaining access, and once that person's helpful, trustworthy, and kind, the barriers go down, the eyes close to that person's behavior, then that person's going to select one or more children. And usually it's going to be a child who's disconnected from the group. Because keep in mind, the abuser wants to isolate a child. The abuser wants to win that child's trust and start to carve that child away for inappropriate touch and talk, which is meant to happen in secrecy. And that child who's already disconnected from the group or on the fringe is easier to isolate. They're already partially isolated, okay? That single parent child, and good grief, there's more of those than ever before, okay? That child who's looking for someone to follow and trust because they lack that at home. So I know I'm thinking internationally, I'm talking about entire cultures where the young people are looking for someone to follow and trust. And when you have that person that has a deviant sexual desire that's the person leading that group of people, it could be a very dangerous and toxic environment. Okay, so there's the gaining access, selecting one or more children, Start to win the trust of that child and weave in rule breaking. Weave in that type of behavior or activities that the child knows I'm not supposed to tell anybody about. Okay, it's the video games that mom won't let me watch, or this particular Netflix series, or this activity, or drinking beer, or smoking cigarettes, or whatever. And then the abuser starts to add other forms of rule breaking of a sexual nature, already having created the environment that these things happen here and nobody can know about it, especially not a parent or caregiver. And then it continues to isolate and starts to weave in the pornography, the touch, the accidental nudity, the playful games that involve touch and, you know, skinny dipping and whatever. And then the effort to be able to keep that child quiet. Okay, so the grooming process in its simplest form is the abuser gaining access to where there are children within the age and sexual preference, the stream of commerce, if you will, select one or more children, start to weave in the rule breaking, the nudity and sexual touch, and then keep the victim quiet. Now, if we had the time, what I would want everybody to know is that is a simplified expression of the grooming process, but grooming looks different depending on the age, sex, circumstance, or culture where the child lives. Okay, so if someone wanted to groom a teenage boy, oftentimes in the US and in Western cultures, some of the tools in the belt of the abuser will be alcohol, tobacco, porn, weed. If someone wants to victimize a teenage girl, you see the boy he's visual and easy to stimulate. The girl is wired emotionally for a relationship. So you see that abuser is going to have to create a relationship, then betray it. And to create a relationship takes more time than the visual and the touch. And if you're going to have a communication that forms relationship with a teenage girl, oftentimes you're going to need an iPhone. You're going to need a texter. You're going to need Snapchat. You're going to need some of these communication applications. So when I'm looking at grooming, when someone wants to hurt a teenage girl, I'm looking for forms of communication, especially electronic communication and social media. If someone wants to victimize a 5-year-old, I'm not going to see alcohol, weed, and Facebook. I'm oftentimes going to see playful touch unto isolation. Okay, so those are even generalizations. So if I were invited into that orphanage in Ethiopia, okay, I'm not going to see grooming that looks like it would in the Western culture, but it's going to be the same grooming process, just in a different cultural context. You tracking with me? So
that's amazing. And that's a lot of information you've just shared there. I mean, I'm overwhelmed. And I want to reiterate for those who missed it earlier that you're willing to provide your training materials to individuals who are tuning in. And I've had the opportunity to actually participate in your online training. And it is phenomenal. The information there is very, very useful. So I really appreciate that. Can you tell us a little bit more about the training and where we can get access to that?
Yes, we have two businesses, depending on what type of organization it is. Ministry Safe serves faith-based organizations. Abuse Prevention Systems serves, non-faith-based entities, like the Houston Astros baseball team. You'll find them in Abuse Prevention Systems. So together, we're serving about 30 to 35,000 organizations, mostly in North America. Okay, but the trainings are being used because some of those are international organizations. So we're training people on 6 continents. And that, one particular training is closed captioned in both, in English and in Vietnamese and Russian, Portuguese, French, and a number of other languages, okay? So in serving organizations to put up those protective barriers, those fences, generally it's going to involve training related to preferential offenders in the grooming process, policies and procedures that are rooted in that grooming process, but are different depending on the type of program. Okay, whether it's a camp, or whether it's a school, whether it's a youth sport organization. We're going to help people learn how to screen. We're going to help them understand, here are the high-risk indicators of a preferential offender that you'd like to know before you allow them to work with your children. So it's a full, holistic system that allows entities to put systems and barriers in place to protect children that they serve that get, shaped depending on the type of program it is. The foundation of any safety system, which is what we teach them and provide to them, is the sexual abuse awareness training. Leaders need to have that so they can build the appropriate fences for their program. But everybody who wears a name tag in their program needs to have it as well, because we need everybody to have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a mouth to speak. So the foundational piece is that sexual abuse awareness training, which covers facts versus misconceptions, get that bank of information correct, abuser characteristics, the grooming process, common grooming behaviors, peer-to-peer sexual abuse, and the importance of reporting. So we're training probably about 50,000 people a month online, and have issued already 1,500,000 certificates of completion. So that is that baseline training, and the primary way we deliver it, though you have seen it live, is we provide that online. And so those of you who have your listeners, whether they're getting it live today or whether they see it in a recorded form in the future, if they'll just reach out to you or reach out to my staff, just questions@ministrysafe.com, I'll send that training link directly to them, or I'll just wait to hear from you. And as long as you can give me a first name, last name, and email address, Juanita, I can set you up to where you can send these training links to all of those people.
That is amazing. And I have done the online training as well as the in-person face-to-face. And it was truly informative. And even what you shared earlier, it makes me think about vulnerabilities. And a lot of us don't understand. We think vulnerabilities is simply poverty, but not at all. And even what you're sharing there, it reminds me of my own experience of being victimized by my stepfather, which started with tickling. And even when you mentioned about how with the girl, the grooming process is different, that is very true. With my stepfather, he used to give me Alco Pops, let me stay up late, gave me candy. And so there was the secrets. And of course, with my stepfather, it was a process. It was a lot of a slower process, longer process than if I was the boy and he simply exposed me to pornography. You've made reference a couple of times to peer-to-peer abuse and peer sexual abuse. Can you explain to the listener viewers what exactly that means for those who've not heard that term before?
Yeah, peer-to-peer sexual abuse is child with child inappropriate sexual behavior. And when we talk today about sexual misconduct or even sex trafficking, sex voyeurism, a lot of people will use these words interchangeably, and they're not appropriate to be used interchangeably. There is just one big banner umbrella word of sexual misconduct with lots of different forms of sexual misconduct. So you got your sexual assault, that's adult to adult. Your sexual harassment, that's your adult to adult at work. Your child sexual abuse, that's adult to child. Peer sexual abuse is child with child, okay? And that's generally one of those things that people fall down on two big categories of error. One that says, oh, come on, they're just children. They're just checking out each other's private parts. It's no big deal. It's all play. Okay, and that's just not true. Then there's other people that think every form of touch between a child is felony behavior, and we need to put everybody in orange jumpsuits and give them cigarettes, okay? It's like both of those are wrong. What we need to understand is child with child sexual behavior is problematic, and it's called peer-to-peer sexual abuse. And in general, here's what makes something a peer-to-peer sexual abuse as opposed to just play or curiosity. Okay. Now, even if I saw my child with another child that's checking out each other's plumbing, okay, I'm going to redirect that behavior. But is that sexual behavior sexually abusive behavior or sexually harmful behavior? And really the hallmark there, Juanita, is I have an aggressor child and I have an imbalance of power. Okay. So for example, if I had a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old and I walked around the corner of the bedroom and they look up at me like they're busted, do I have a problem? Like, yeah, I have a problem. I want to redirect that behavior, but do I have a bigger problem than just I need to redirect the behavior? Okay, well, what I'm looking for is, do I have a sexually aggressive child and an imbalance of power? Now, if I walked around the corner and I have an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old, do I have an imbalance of power? Yes. By the disparity in ages, okay? But what if I had an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old? See, that's closer in age, but I still have a problem. What if I have a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old? Now, I'm close in age, but can I still have an imbalance of power? And the answer is yes, because an imbalance of power is not like an algebra problem, okay? That it's got a statistic that you can, here exactly is the bright line of what's in it. It's going to have to use your judgment. So when I have a child who's bigger than another child, more manipulative, or has the stuff, their family is the family that is the access to the activities and the toys and things like that. And that child said, you got to do what I say if you want to be involved in community, or the little bully. Or if you have a special needs child, you easily have your imbalance of power. Okay, so if you see a situation or hear of a situation that involves sexual behavior between children and there's that imbalance of power, you have a peer-to-peer sexual abuse. You have sexually harmful behavior. And in the US, for example, that is reportable to the authorities. Now, oftentimes the authorities aren't going to take it as seriously as you'd want them to, okay, because that's still in the minds and eyes of those people that are untrained law enforcement. It's still like, what do you want us to do with it? Okay. So it's harmful behavior, and see why that's important for my entities to understand. I have plenty of entities, especially worldwide, Juanita, that they think just because we have this facility and nobody's allowed in or out from the outside, now we've done what it takes to make the children in our care safe. When oftentimes what you've done is you've just created the opportunity for the peer-to-peer to be rampant while you keep your eyes focused on that fence to keep out that preferential or abduction offender from the outside. So it's amazing how much damage happens, for example, in these gatherings of children, like in these Eastern European, boarding houses or orphanages. There's just a pecking order in those communities, and it's rampant. And those children are experiencing it, and they know that there's no one who's going to believe them. They know there's no one who's going to do anything about it. And for some of these very smaller children, they all have that sexual engine. God gave it to us. But through that process of puberty, that sexual engine wakens. And then we hopefully have the cultural boundaries on it and guideposts to be able to help shepherd that child into a healthy sexual expression. But see, when somebody is waking up that engine of a child at 6 and at 7, and then telling that child to keep it quiet, now you've created a great deal of confusion. Now you've given that child no manual on how the sexual engine works or how it's to be expressed. You create the opportunity for that child to recreate that behavior on someone younger, smaller, weaker. All in the name of, we don't want to talk about it because this is an awful discussion to have around lunch or dinner or whatever. And that's people, we have to have this conversation.
And it is a truly important conversation that unfortunately doesn't happen enough. It is very much taboo, not just here in the Caribbean, but in the West. And a lot more needs to be done so that we're able to really shine light into the darkness. We often hear in the media and on the news about sexual abuse cases in the US. And so the listening viewers may have this false perception that it is a US problem. Is that really the reality, or is it more of a global issue?
No, it's definitely a global issue. You will hear about it in the US, primarily because of some of the infrastructure in the US. Okay, so every state in the US, Texas included, have laws that require people to report abuse or neglect of a child. So when I go into some places in Europe, there is no such infrastructure. There isn't a organized criminal justice system to be able to understand who might have had experience in the criminal justice process that I can be warned against with respect to my child. So in the US, a lot of that does exist. It's not to be confused with perfect, okay? But there's also a court system in the US that allows people to sue somebody and get damages. And that's, some people consider that like, wow, it's like the wild, wild west of you guys suing everybody. Yeah, there's got some criticism that's appropriate about that. But what it does do is it incentivizes some people financially to expose wrongdoing. Sure enough, they're going to make money from it, but it reveals things that are bad and that need to change. And once they are revealed, then lawmakers see that, who are elected from the same people that are angry about it, and you get changes in the law that are intended to further protect children, make the criminal penalties stiffer, make the communication when a child is being hurt mandatory, and then punish those people that fail to report it. So we have all of these things in the US that force this bad behavior to the surface, and a lot of abilities through lawsuits and criminal fines to force them to make changes or not be allowed to be in business. Now, there's a system in the UK that is still based upon the Western judicial system, but it's not exactly like the US. Same with Canada, okay? So you'll see some of the same litigation take place, for example, with the Catholic Church, but that process is a lot different. The lawmaking process in Australia and the UK is different. So it's more nimble here. I wish it was far more nimble in the US than it is, but we get to see it and the media picks it up because it's sensational. It offends us. And the media loves to show me things that are going to make me go, oh, that offends me. The same ability to have a media system in some of these countries isn't widespread. There isn't a lot of communication, and oftentimes there's a lot of government control about what can and can't be said. So, for example, in China, if there's a circumstance where a lot of children are being victimized in a state-run facility, do you think anybody's going to allow you to publish anything about it? Okay, so there's just a lot of the information doesn't come out and get shared the same way it will in Western cultures, especially in the US. So I would like to use the US as there is a worldwide problem. We just get a different petri dish here to be able to learn what we can and take what we can learn, and this infrastructure of people, for example, paying me to help them protect their organizations and allowing us to take that money and reach out into countries that can't pay us to do this. There is no law in some of these places that you put these practices in place, or these training requirements or something like that. But if we can take what's available to us in the US and craft programs that can be used internationally, then by all means, let's let your show be one of the ways in which we can reach that people group.
And as you've just shared there, that sexual abuse is not just limited to the US, which we should know full well. When we look in the media, we hear stories about abuse, exploitation taking place in orphanages. It's very sometimes disheartening to hear stories of an individual coming from the West, building an orphanage in a place, for example, such as Kenya, and using that to access and to abuse young girls or even boys. We've spoken a lot about grooming. Can you tell us how grooming differs between the different countries? Because of course, cultural variances will have a lot to say where grooming is concerned. If we think about a place like Chennai in India, there may not be the access to alcohol, so that wouldn't be used. Can you give us a little bit of context of how grooming is different in other parts of the world?
Yeah, I want, for those people who are in other parts of the world or have influence in places that provide programs there, I believe that the grooming process is consistent. And it's not because all of these sexual abusers went to a class to learn how the grooming process works. It's us trying to identify, these are the steps from the patterns that we've seen. And if you got to oversimplify it, it's simply somebody that's growing up in a culture. Okay, and what does that person want to do? I have a deviant sexual desire. I'd like to express my deviant sexual desire in this particular place. Okay, well, how am I going to get access? How am I going to carve that child away? What things would I need to introduce to that child that would be successful at giving that child, pushing back the barriers and the weaving in secrecy? So that's that same process. And we get to see it in the US that I think that allows me to make some commentary outside the US, because there are some heavily Asian populations in the US. There are some heavily Hispanic and Latino populations in the US. Okay, so there are different cultural communities represented in the US that if you go into some of these Asian cultures, okay, it's a high honor culture. Okay, another way to say it's oftentimes a shame culture. That if there is this particular, where's the gaining access? Okay, it's clan and family. Okay, so this person can gain access through a familial relationship. Okay, then there's the carving out time alone, where everybody in that culture may know exactly what that person is doing in carving that child away, but because that's a patriarchal figure, everybody knows that it's not appropriate in my culture to push back when this person moves this child to this particular place. And then once that child has experienced that behavior in that culture, to be able to disclose that or to do anything that brings disparagement upon that person who's viewed in that culture as patriarchal and that honor kind of system, it's enough to keep that child quiet all by itself. So in taking that step process into, say, Cambodia, or into Kenya, okay? Who are the people that, remember we talked about that you're educated, attractive, and articulate in the US, that has people drop their barriers. What would some of those things in Kenya be that would have people drop their barriers? Is it a government official? Is it a teacher? Is it somebody that's a medical professional? Because the abuser is thinking way ahead. It's trying to think through, how can I position myself to where this particular culture will see me as somebody for whom they can drop the barriers? Okay, so I'm staying at 30,000 feet because it's very difficult to get granular into any one of those, but it's the same questions. How can somebody create a position or step into a role that they have trusted time alone? What would be the things that you would provide that child? And you go into some places like in Haiti, you don't have to provide a child much to win that child's trust. Just in terms of giving that child food, shelter, clothing. Build something which is actually clean, where the children are fed. You'll have some parents there that are excited about their children being in a clean bed, clean clothes, healthy food, and an education. And we've had a situation where somebody who is a deviant sexual desire moved in, created that program because it gathered the children to him. So culture by culture, it's going to look a little different, but that's what I would want your people to learn. Grooming process. A, know that there are people out there that have a deviant sexual desire. B, with a grooming process mentality, ask and answer the questions, how would somebody give it a go here? And even get a little bit more specific. If we're a teenage girl, how would somebody gain access, carve that teenage girl away, and how would they keep that girl quiet? And be proactive, even in your circumstance, which you described. It's like the gift giving, the privileges, the tickling, the secrecy. If I can even get the young children in advance and say, you know, boys and girls, here's two things that I want you to know. And I don't have to say the word penis. I don't have to show them the anatomically correct doll. Just tell them, I want you to know in this program, no secrets. There will be no secrets. When you come and share with me anything that makes you uncomfortable, I will believe you. If you can convince a child no secrets, and if anybody makes you uncomfortable, I'm not just telling you I'll believe you, I'm encouraging, in fact, I'm instructing you to come tell me if you hear about that from anybody else. You start changing the culture. If you can take away secrecy and let the child know that if the child's uncomfortable, now when you go back even into your world, Juanita, if somebody would have said to you, no secrets, and no matter what, if anybody makes you uncomfortable, now, somewhere along the way, you know, the candy, the staying up late, all that's great for a kid, but at some point it's going to be a cost. At some point you're going to hit that line. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. That wasn't what I think my friends are experiencing. You know, that's the moment where I want that child to share with me. To give that child permission and let that child know this is what I want, and I'll be the person and I'll believe you, and then show them that you believe them. Yeah, I think it's life-changing for those children.
And thank you, because as I was mentioning earlier about the good secrets, that information really isn't enough. And it's funny because my book is called Can You Keep a Secret? And the title of the book is because when I was being sexually abused, that is the question that I asked. And I got, it depends. And that is why I didn't disclose. And that is one of the issues. Unfortunately, a lot of people respond incorrectly to that secret question. And when I was talking to some primary school students, primary school meaning they were very young, about 5, 6, 7, I wanted them to understand. I didn't want to cause confusion about the whole secret thing. So what I said to them, if somebody comes up to you and says that they have a secret, doesn't matter who the person is, I said, say yes to hear the secret. And if they tell you to do something, you run away and you tell your mom. And one of the students, he was maybe around 7, and he said, Miss Headley, if someone comes up to me and says, can you keep a secret? I'll say yes, and I'll listen to the secret. And if they offered me money to do bad things, I would take the money and run. And I said, don't do that. Do not take the money and run. But I was trying to get the children to understand, because there are times when peers may actually want to disclose to one another about what they're going through. And depending on the culture, the variation of that question will change. In a place like Ghana, they might say, can I tell you something? Can I tell you something? But the child wants to disclose. And the fact of the matter is, too often, not in my personal experience, too often the perpetrator will say, this is our secret. With me, my stepfather abused me in my sleep. There was no conversation. There was no secret discussions, but giving me Alco Pops, which is a type of alcohol drink, giving me candy and special privileges, that is where the secrets took place without him even keeping me quiet or threatening me into silence. Now, I know that there are people listening in to today's show, whether live or thereafter, who will want to know, what can I do? Besides your training that is available, how can we solve this problem? What is it that we can do to protect the people in our church, in our community? How do we solve this problem?
Yeah, and how we solve that problem is going to be different depending on where you are and the circumstance you find yourself in. So I want to be very general in answering that question. That I'm a big believer in, you've got to give people eyes to see and ears to hear, and then really, really, really encourage them to have a mouth that speaks. And that's going to be challenging, especially knowing that most children are victimized in their core world, even like your experience that you shared. I can talk to youth sport organizations and camps and schools. Most children are not victimized in these programs, Juanita. They're victimized in their core world, okay? And when somebody's victimized in their core world, to tell them, hey, no secrets, and I want you to share with me if you're experiencing, they understand. This is going to mess up Christmas, okay? This is going to create some serious disruption in the home. Or when the mother finds out this is what's happening from this uncle or this particular family member that's doing this to children, and they're just doing the best they can to keep that child, they need to understand here's what the risk is, change what they believe, change their just awareness, okay? Wake you up to this risk. Once I've awakened you to the risk, I need to make sure that people are better believers of children. Just like you said, be sensitive to the child coming and disclosing to you, okay? Because we can mess that up even after we've told the child to be brave. And then we just need to have the courage to do the next right thing. And the next right thing, if you're a teacher in a school, is call the authorities. But if it's in your core world, if it's in a place where the person who's the bad actor has authority, you're potentially going to risk something doing the next right thing. But I would just encourage you, whatever that risk is not more significant than what the risk is to the child. And if there's any way in which I can be of help in helping you take that next step, I think that's what I've been raised up and equipped to do.
And I was just thinking about how the Bible says that a man makes his plans and God directs his steps, and every one of us has a calling on our life, and what you're doing is amazing. I keep saying it because it's so true. And I really trust that those who are listening in have really been educated and empowered, and beyond that, inspired. The Bible says we should not have a spirit of fear, but of power and of a sound mind. And I know that your desire is for people to have the tools to make the right steps and decisions, not for them to be in fear, but to be empowered by knowing what exactly they can do. I want to ask you, I'm curious to know, what do you believe is an effective deterrent for individuals who perpetrate abuse? And what are your thoughts on naming and shaming perpetrators?
That's a tricky question. I mean, I believe if people are going to engage in bad behavior, then if you're going to engage in criminal behavior, let's just let it be known. Okay. But in terms of naming and shaming, I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I think that characterization can be interpreted a lot of different ways by different people. So in terms of preventing, I think it's on the people that are charged with protecting children. Just if there is a legal system that allows you to bring it to someone's attention, bring it to their attention. Do what it takes to be able to pull the children into safer environments, once we've identified risk. But in terms of our criminal justice system in the U.S. kind of does name and shame, if you will, through sexual abuse, sexual offender registries and criminal records and the media coverage and things like that. So beyond that, it's a difficult question for me to answer. But one question I'd like to answer that you didn't ask me is that I see a lot of the value of what I do for those people who've already been victimized. That when you hear somebody teaching about awareness, to have them know that they've probably spent a lot of time growing up in this period of silence and isolation and believing that I'm the only one and somehow it was my fault when it was all happening, and that struggle, to hear this information and realize I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. Okay. It wasn't my fault. And to kind of empower them that this is your story, not because of anything you did. And it's so common that we have people in professions actually teaching people about it worldwide, and to encourage them. And this is possibly something I'd like to hear from you on another show, is what was your journey to wellness, knowing that that journey is probably not over? You know, what could you share from your experience? And I would help if I could, but see, now you get outside of my professional expertise into what would you tell someone who's listening to you that, yes, I want to protect the children in my care, but this has been my story. Where do I go from here? What things can I access? And I'll be a part of that solution if that does become something that you want to do in the future. But I think awareness simply is the first step in letting people know it's safe for me to ask.
Absolutely. And for me, I mean, I want you to hire me on the spot. I think you're amazing. We could do a whole sort of triple thing, me, you, and your wife, do presentations around the world. I think you're phenomenal. And again, I really, really hope the listening audience have truly paid attention to all you've shared. You're a U.S. attorney giving free advice to those who are listening in, and you're empowering people and you're changing lives. And that is really phenomenal. Gandhi says, be the change you want to see. And I feel that when we have the tools, we can make a difference, and it starts one person at a time. When we think about numbers, it can be so overwhelming to hear about children who've been abused, young women who've been abused, young boys, even trafficking, etc. But the desire here is not for people to be overwhelmed by what they hear, what they read, but to be empowered. And even just offering your materials for those who want to be able to be trained is fantastic. Even as you shared earlier, the numbers of people who have been trained and been certified, this is amazing because it means we're making steps in protecting and safeguarding. And therefore, these perpetrators really need to think twice before they go on to re-offend and to harm a young girl, a young boy, woman, or man. I want to ask you, though, if you were able to do one thing right now and you had the capacity to do so, what would it be? Every one of us has limitations. What is the one thing you wish you could do, but currently you can't because of resources, lockdown, etc.?
That's a dangerous question to ask me because I dream big. I'll be practical though, okay? I would really love, especially given some of the difficulty associated with sexual abuse in athletics. Here we're about to go in July to Tokyo and have international gatherings of people, and it's going to be heavily televised because they're not allowing international fans there. I'd love to be able to have a steady, consistent communication through that vehicle that's going out worldwide to create different types of training modules depending on where you are, the language, the culture, and just use that infrastructure to not gather people for the beauty of sport and competition, but also the beauty of being able to communicate through those avenues all over the world and information that might be helpful and useful, and just start conversations where they haven't been started before. So that's as practical as I can get with anything I would want to do to change the world. Come on.
Thank you so much. And of course, the sky is not the limits. With God, we know all things are truly possible. Absolutely. So do you have any last words? Would you be able to provide your contact information for those who are interested in reaching out and getting in touch? Maybe somebody from the US is listening in and needs your advice or has a case. What are your last words, contact information, any advice, or any last thoughts you'd like to give to people who are listening in at the moment?
You can just go to ministrysafe.com, and I'm easy to find. For those people that are going to be viewing this in a recorded form, we can add the contact information that can appear on the screen for both you and me and give them the instructions for how they can access the training and request a particular language if they have that need. So if you want me, go to ministrysafe.com and go through the contact us and you'll get my staff, or we'll put that information up in the recorded form.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Truly, truly amazed to have had you on the show. I have been inspired. I have been empowered. Although I've heard you speak before, you're just reinforced in all that I've heard. And the information it is still relevant and still current. So I truly want to thank you for coming on the show. I'm looking forward to getting the contract so I can come and work with you and your wife. Thank you so much, Gregory. It's been amazing. Truly, truly honored to have had you.
Cheers, Juanita.
God bless you. And for those of you who are still listening in, I want to thank you for tuning into Psychcast Diaries. I trust the information has been useful. We all need knowledge and education to be better empowered to protect and safeguard the children in our world. For you to be able to get a copy of my new book, you can pre-order it on Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk. The book is called, of course, Can You Keep a Secret? To find out about my weekly Zooms, about my podcasts, you can reach out to me on my website, changingcases.org, changingcases.org. Please do share this with friends, family members, and co-workers. We all need knowledge and education to be able to safeguard the people in our world. Education is liberation. Please tune in on Wednesday for another episode of Can You Keep a Secret Diaries. We will be meeting with Jeffrey D. Brown, Academy Award-winning director, who was also the director of Sold the Movie, S-O-L-D, Sold the Movie. So tune in on Wednesday and again next week for another episode. God bless you all and have an amazing week.
I feel lonely deep inside, and I wanna talk about it. Can I trust you on my side? Cause I wanna talk about it. Can you keep a secret? Keep a secret. Can you keep a secret? Keep a secret. Can you keep a secret? I wanna trust you. I wanna trust you. So can you keep my secret? You see this road gets tough, gets cold, but still never lose that hope. You got everything it takes and more. You're not alone in this war. Help is on the way every other day. You can lean on my shoulders, cause you are superhuman. You got my trust and together we can be stronger. So we can talk about it. Yeah, we can talk about it, yeah. So we can talk about it, yeah, let's talk about it, yeah. I feel lonely deep inside, and I wanna talk about it. Can I trust you on my side? Cause I wanna talk about it. Can you keep a secret? Keep a secret. Can you keep a secret? Keep a secret. Can you keep a secret? I wanna trust you. I wanna trust you. So can you keep my secret?